I'm Peter Greenberg, and you're listening to Sweet Success.
You've just checked in to Sweet Success. Join me, Cline, for exclusive conversations with hotel executives, hospitality leaders, and industry innovators. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and techniques these masters of hospitality relentlessly refine. Whether you're already in the industry or just starting out, tune in every week to unlock the secret to your sweet success. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sweet Success. I'm your host, Cline, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Peter Greenberg to the show. Peter is an Emmy Award-winning producer, a writer, a radio broadcaster, and a television correspondent. He's also the travel editor for CBS News, a position he's held for nearly 17 years now. Peter is known as one of the most recognized, honored, and respected frontline travel news journalists in the country. In fact, Travel Weekly named him one of the most influential people in travel alongside Bill Marriott and Richard Branson. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
And happy to be with you.
You started your career in journalism as the West Coast correspondent for Newsweek in Los Angeles and San Francisco. What attracted you to journalism in the first place? And did you always know you wanted to end up in travel?
No, in fact, I started my career as a student journalist at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin, at a time that most people forget that university was the most active, most violent anti-war university in the country, more than Berkeley and Columbia combined. We had the National Guard there for 2 years. My standard issue working for the student newspaper was a helmet, a gas mask, a flak jacket, and a notebook. And it was a war zone. And the focus of the mainstream media back then was on the campuses in revolt as they protested against the Vietnam War. And that's when I got hired. Hired is an interesting word in quotes, as a stringer for Newsweek. I was paid $20 a month. And a stringer job was basically that you were the guy in Des Moines or Wyoming, not part of a major Newsweek bureau, but if anything ever happened there, your job was to hold down the fort until another correspondent got there. Well, within days of me getting that job, I was the correspondent there because it was a war zone. It was on the evening news every night, and it was front page news. And so that's what got me started covering the anti-war movement where I was going to school in Madison, Wisconsin. It was then when I got hired by Newsweek and moved out to the West Coast.
Wow. So were you a student when you first got hired by them?
I was.
Wow. That's incredible. And talk about like literally being thrown into the middle of the action.
I mean, I remember the Mark Twain quote of never letting school interfere with your education. And that's exactly what happened to me. Newsweek was sending me to Washington, D.C. to cover everything from Kent State to Chicago and the Chicago 7, you name it. I was there. And it was because of that and that experience and that opportunity that they then hired me as probably the youngest correspondent in the history of the magazine. And then soon enough, they moved me first to Houston, Texas. I worked there for a couple of months covering Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, which is a brave new world for me, but some of the best journalism I ever had a chance to do. And then they moved me west for the next 7 years as the West Coast correspondent for Newsweek.
Wow. Did you finish college?
I did, and there's a very funny story associated with that because in covering all those riots, I incurred a huge number of parking fines in Madison, Wisconsin. And I get to my office at Newsweek in Los Angeles, and a letter arrives from the University of Wisconsin saying, I'm not getting a diploma, I've not graduated because I never paid my fines. And the fines, they put the fines on a piece of paper. There was no more room left to list all the fines. And so I took that piece of paper to a friend of mine who was an artist. I had them letter over it in Gothic lettering, diploma. And that's what hung on my wall for about 12 years. And then, ironically, I was a correspondent also for ABC News, and that comes later. But there I was back in Madison, Wisconsin, interviewing live the governor of Wisconsin and the chancellor at the University of Wisconsin for Good Morning America. And they didn't know I was going to do this in the booth. I decided I was going to go for it live. I knew my mother was watching, and she's never forgiven me for not having a diploma. And so live on television, I said, Madam Chancellor, I don't know if you know this, but I went to the University of Wisconsin. So shoot, good for you. And I said, but there seemed to be a serious misunderstanding about parking fines. And I never got my diploma. I was wondering if you'd waive the statute of limitations so I can finally get my degree. And on camera, she said, I hereby waive the limitations. My mother saw the show. My mother wrote the chancellor, and my mom got the diploma.
Wait, Peter, this all happened on Good Morning America?
I'm afraid it did.
This is incredible. I need to find this clip and put it in the show notes. That's an amazing story. And I love that your mom was there with the follow-up. She was like, it was on GMA. Please, can we get that actual piece of paper?
And she got it, and there it was.
Wow, that's fantastic. Were you going to school for journalism?
No, I was going to school because I was supposed to go to school. I graduated from high school in New York just knowing I was going to college and knowing very little about why I was going other than the fact that I was going. And I got to the university. It was 33,000 students then. It's over 50,000 students now. And 30,000 students, my God, it's so easy to get lost. I had no idea what my identity was going to be, what I was going to do. And one of the kids in the dorm said, well, if you want to find out what you want to do, my suggestion is either go and pledge a fraternity or join the student paper. So I went down to fraternity row. I took one look at that, and I ran to the university newspaper. And I walked in with no political consciousness whatsoever. And that was the day of the big Dow chemical riots on campus. Dow, maker of napalm, which was instrumental in killing and injuring so many people in Vietnam. And I walked into the paper. All the windows in the newspaper were broken. Tear gas was everywhere. 165 people were already in the hospital. And I came in idiotically saying, gee, I'd like to join the paper. And the guy said, well, look around. You're the only one here, so you're covering the story. So I covered the story. I wrote a story, which was the worst piece of journalism I'd ever done. I didn't know what I was doing, but they had no choice. They ran it. And that student newspaper, the Daily Cardinal, was really the paper of record in the capital city of Wisconsin. And the next morning, I woke up in the dorm and everybody was saying, hey, good way to go, and patting me on the back. I went, I like this. And I stayed, and the rest is history.
Wow. So when you walked into that office that was a literal war zone, was there a part of you that was like, I'm scared, I need to get out of here, this seems crazy? Or was there a little part of you inside that was like, something interesting is happening here and I need to be here for it?
The answer is yes to both.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And you said it was the worst piece of journalism that you ever did. I imagine it was also the first piece of journalism that you ever did.
That is correct. The story had no beginning, middle, or end. It had no kicker. It was disgusting, but they ran it. And you know what? I thankfully that they did, because here I am today.
So after Newsweek, was that when you went to ABC News?
Well, not right away. When I left Newsweek, what happened is when I was at Newsweek, I was covering every major cover story you can imagine. And your older viewers would know this. It was everything from Gary Gilmore to Howard Hughes to Patty Hearst to Vietnam to you name it. And I was literally covering, and then I was also doing a story separately from them, an interview I was doing with the hottest star on television at the time. His name was Freddie Prinze. And he was starting the hottest show on television at the time called Chico and the Man with Jack Albertson. And so I was assigned to do a freelance piece for Cosmopolitan, a celebrity profile on Freddie Prinze. But in the meantime, I was in Utah doing the Gary Gilmore cover story for Newsweek. So I'd be flying back to LA on the weekends to do the interviews with Freddie. And then I went back. Gary Gilmore was then executed. You may remember the Norman Mailer book, The Executioner's Song, which was later turned into a movie with Tommy Lee Jones and Rosanna Arquette. And when the execution was over, I came back to LA. And that night, I was just falling asleep. And I did fall asleep. And about 4:00 in the morning, my phone rang. And it was a friend of mine saying, you better get up. Freddie Prinze just put a gun to his head and killed himself. And that began a long investigative piece that I did that ended up as a 25,000 word piece in Playboy, which really told you what really happened to him. And what happened right after that was everybody wanted to do the movie based on his life. The only person who had the rights to it, unbeknownst to me, was me. And I knew nothing about producing, but I also wanted to protect the story. So everybody came to me to do the story. I said, okay, but I'm going to produce it. And they finally had to make me a deal to do it. And I had enough time to pick the right screenwriter, the right director, people who knew a whole lot more than I did. And that was my first movie that I did for CBS. I then did another movie for CBS based on a story I did for Newsweek on Air Force war games that are so realistic in the desert in Nevada the pilots ended up killing each other many times over. And that turned out to be a movie called Red Flag. And the crew that I assembled for that, I then lent to another producer who did a little movie you might remember called Top Gun. And same kind of concept, war games. And then I did another movie, which was probably the most controversial movie at the time that ABC ever did. In fact, they only aired it once. It was basically an expose on the negative and powerful impact of television ministers. And we did a movie called Pray TV, starring John Ritter and Ned Beatty and Richard Kiley, a great cast. And then from there, I was still doing my journalism. I was doing a weekly column in the Chicago Tribune on travel, which then got syndicated to about 60 papers. But in the midst of all that, after I did all those movies, Paramount knocked on my door. And the next thing I know, I'm running dramatic television for Paramount. And not never giving up the journalism, but at the same time developed a show there that I know you'll remember called MacGyver. And then I left and went to MGM, developed another show there called 30-something, never gave up the journalism, wrote a book or two in the process, nonfiction books. And then when I left MGM, I came back. And then the person who was at one point running domestic television for syndication for Paramount, shows like Entertainment Tonight, he had become the executive producer of Good Morning America. And he had read my columns on travel. Nobody else was doing what I was doing, which was investigative reporting, not talking about lovely London or beautiful Bermuda. And he brought me to New York as the travel correspondent for ABC News. And I did that for 7 years. And then I was snatched up by Jeff Zucker. And for the next 14 years, I was the travel editor for NBC on the Today Show. And then when NBC was being bought by Comcast, I got snatched away by CBS. And that's what I've been doing ever since as the travel editor for CBS News.
That's incredible, Peter. That's like 7 lifetimes in there. I mean, author of a book, journalist, TV presenter, movie producer. And the thing that really strikes me when you're speaking too is a lot of these moments along the way, you had never had experience before. Just like when you walked into the school paper, you had never been a journalist before. When you had these rights to this story, you were like, well, I know that I can tell the story the best. So I'm now a movie producer. And I imagine the first time you wrote a book, you had never written a book before either. So what is it, do you think, that allows you to take on these new, really big, really intimidating tasks, and then obviously do a really good job at them too?
Well, half of luck is just showing up. But the other thing is this. I think I inherited something from my mom, which she was brilliant at, and I learned from her. She perfected the art of the conversation. She told me from an early age, which I didn't understand then, but totally understand now, that it's more important to be interested than interesting. And so I entered every different opportunity, asking questions, looking for common ground, looking for relatable experience, and the people who would then trust me to do those jobs, and off and running.
Wow. And you mentioned something earlier about really being a travel reporter, not necessarily saying like, these are the hot destinations to go to. So how do you kind of see the delineation of the types of stories you like to work on versus maybe what the misperception of journalism and travel could be?
Well, there are 3 areas of journalism that lend themselves to extreme prostitution: entertainment, sports, and travel. For entertainment, in return for access, people just say nice things and you promote. Mm-hmm. In sports, if you want to travel with a team, can't say bad things, you promote. In travel, you want to go somewhere, you promote. Mm-hmm. I don't do that. I don't promote anything. I present it. And there's a big difference. I have a rule that none of my scripts can end in the letters ST. It can't be the best, the finest, the greatest, the loveliest. That's garbage. That means I'm writing a brochure. No. What the audience wants me to tell them is not that London is lovely or Bermuda is beautiful, but, if the hotel has no record of their reservation and the airline puts them in the wrong seat and the cab driver takes them on a 60-mile ride into town when it should be 2, what do they need to know? What questions do they need to ask at the beginning so that none of that stuff ever happens to them, and then they can enjoy the experience? So much of what I do is about the process of travel. So when I was at Newsweek and realizing that I was always on an airplane covering a story, everything west of the Mississippi, I decided to use my access as a journalist to learn the process of travel. So I became thoroughly qualified in airplane cockpits, in airplane cabins, in airplane maintenance. I also became a Coast Guard captain at a much younger age than that, by the way. I am not a train conductor, but what that means is when I get on an airplane and I talk to the captain, when I ask questions, they have a reasonably good understanding at that point that I might know what I'm talking about, and then I can learn from them. Same thing from going on a bridge of a ship. And that's what I did. So when I came in to do my first column on travel, it was from that background. I wasn't talking about promoting anything. I wasn't talking about beautiful beaches. In fact, one of the books I wrote a couple of years ago, which my publisher at the time didn't want to publish, even my staff didn't even want to research, I went to the publisher and I said, I'm going to make you a deal. Don't give me an advance. I know this book is going to be great. And what you're going to do is you'll pay me X number of dollars every time a book is sold. And if the book ever goes on the New York Times bestseller list, you have to pay me a lot of money. And they laughed and they made the deal. Let me tell you the name of the book. Don't Go There. It was my guide to all the places in the world that suck. All the places you want to miss. Because people have limited time, limited budget. Why shouldn't they have that information? And by the way, that book became a New York Times bestseller. And number 2, it's now a regular segment on one of my PBS shows every week.
I love it. I love it. The confidence that you had, because what I'm hearing is you really respect your audience. You are treating them as adults. You're saying you deserve all of the information, not the fluffy PR talking points version. You deserve the real information and you can make your own decision. And it reminds me of something you said earlier about when you started at the school paper and your first piece being your worst piece was that you didn't really know about story structure. And it sounds like you do now. So how do you think about story structure?
Well, it depends on the story, of course. But if you're doing a story about an incident or an event, it's not about you to judge it. It's for you to report it and to see through everybody else's eyes what they're experiencing and what the issues are. If you're talking about an issue, that's actually more difficult to do because you're not, chasing a fire truck. You're actually structuring a story that allows people to understand something that they may not even be interested in or understand to begin with. And that takes more time. But at the end of the day, when you're dealing with travel, that's the one word, think about this, that I can use in just about any sentence, it'll make sense. It's the largest service industry in the world. It's responsible for the GDP of about 93 countries. It's bigger than people give it credit for. And so that's where I'm covering it as a big story. And by the way, part of that travel is not just the process of travel. I specialized at Newsweek. I still specialize today in aircraft accident investigation. I'm the first guy to tell you maybe not what happened, but what they're looking at. And then, of course, I am the first guy to tell you what happened because I have great connections and sources at the NTSB and all the guys who do that hard and tough work under the most adversarial conditions you can imagine, or I should say adverse conditions that determines the probable cause. And from that, you learn how to fix something that should never happen again.
Yeah. You've now covered the travel industry through recessions, geopolitical upheavals, pandemics, massive technological change. Is there anything that still surprises you?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't surprise me anymore, but it used to surprise me a lot about how resilient the industry is, how fast it bounces back. And the reason why it no longer surprises me, it finally dawned on me that travel is not something that we want to do. Travel is something that we need to do. It's part of our cultural DNA. And if you deny that to people, that's when, people go nuts and governments get destabilized. It's that powerful. So now that I understand that, then I understand why travel is so resilient.
Sure. You were talking about the breadth of work that you've done, and I know that you have won multiple Emmys. Can you tell us about earning that first Emmy, winning that first Emmy, and what that felt like to you?
Well, it actually goes back to the University of Wisconsin quite by coincidence. A good friend of mine who was at school with me at the same time, we both happened to be in Washington, D.C. at the same time. One day, let's go have lunch. We had lunch to catch up. And as we're walking down the street, we bump into his college roommate quite by coincidence. Hey, what are you doing here in Washington? I'm a lawyer. Wow, what kind of law? Well, actually, he starts telling us one of the cases he's representing. It was unbelievable. And I said, does anybody know that story? He said, no, it's been going on for 9 years. I looked at Glenn Silver. He looked at me. We got his number. The next stop we made was ABC News. And that resulted in a primetime 2020 special that won the Emmy for Best Investigative Reporting. And it took 10 years to get the story out, but it turned things around. And in fact, they just had the reunion of everybody involved in that story, which goes back to 1975. They just had the 50-year reunion earlier this year.
Wow. I think that story is so illustrative of why journalism is so important. I mean, it changed the trajectory of that story, it sounds like.
But the important thing today, especially today, is not whether or not it's a good story or not whether or not we could do it. It's did we have the platform to do it on? And back then we did. And those platforms are starting to disappear.
I'd love your take on that because in some ways, people have more access than ever, right? You don't need to physically go to ABC and have those contacts and knock on the door. If something catches wind on social media and goes viral, like you might be getting a similar amount of eyeballs. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like, how do you see that landscape changing?
I don't mind the eyeballs and I don't mind the access. I mind the vetting. I mind the fact that when I was at Newsweek, that the hour of the day and the day of the week that I used to dread was 3 p.m. LA time on Friday. Why? Because that was the day I had to figure out, I had to get on the phone and call New York to talk to the fact checkers. And the fact checkers, if I couldn't prove every I was dotted and every T was crossed, if I couldn't prove that I had two independent sources corroborating everything that was in my story never ran.
Yeah.
So where's that today? It's not there. We've allowed technology to take precedence over common sense and intelligence.
Yes.
And so that is the biggest challenge to journalism today. You hear the words fake news. I haven't even gotten involved yet to talk to you about AI. But even without AI, we don't have the fact checking right now. And so the only salvation that the audience has, and that's evaporating too, is who can they depend on as a trusted source of news and information? I'd like to think I'm one of them, and there are certainly many, many others, but that big number is starting to diminish.
Well, and you are one of them because you have this history and experience and dot the I's, cross the T's. But how many, quote, trusted sources are emerging that don't do that?
That's the problem. They shouldn't be trusted. And look, it's a generational disconnect. I have about 14 people who work for me. Most of them are under the age of 35. They don't even watch me because they don't even own TVs. They're too busy TikToking. And the problem is, what you do for the sake of expedience is going to come to bite you in the ass at a certain point. And by the way, I can't fix it and I can't change it, although I have a rule of my staff. And the rule of my staff is if I give them a research question and they come back with a 3-word answer, and that answer is the web said, they're fired.
Yes. I found it on the internet. Not good enough.
Yeah.
So let's talk about AI. It sounds like you have some thoughts.
Well, I've got some fears. I understand the promise of AI. I'll give you an example. The other day, just for shits and giggles, I went on ChatGPT and I said, hey, could you write a feature about me that might have been written by the late Jimmy Breslin, the celebrated columnist in New York? And about 18 seconds later, it did. And I look at this piece and it's brilliantly written. It was colorfully written. I liked me. I loved me in the piece. There was only one small problem. A third of it was incorrect. Now, if I had given that piece to anybody on my staff, right, prior to them being fired, of course, but if I'd given that to them, they would have just used it. There's your problem.
Right. Or taken it as gospel. They would have believed it.
Either way. So the constant struggle is not the ability of getting information, it's the ease of manipulation. And right now, we're moving at such exponentially fast speed to develop the technology. We're not moving at an equal speed to manage it properly and ethically.
Yeah. How do we fix it? Or do we? Are we too far gone?
Right now, I don't think we're too far gone, but I think we're going to reach an inflection point where something really screws up and it costs lives or careers or both. And that may put, a stop for the moment for some much needed reflection.
If you think about AI and its place in the travel industry, what do you predict it can, should, will do?
Well, it's already doing it. And in some of it, it's not bad. If I want to give AI, let me put it in my terms. I'd love AI to wash my car. I would love AI to clean my house. I do not want AI to tell me where I'm going to the airport tomorrow. I do not want AI to plan my trip. I do not want AI to supplant the conversation I'd like to have with you.
Right.
That's the problem. So if you want to keep AI in back of the house operations in travel, like doing accounting work in the back rooms of a hotel, great. I don't want to see AI anywhere near the front desk. I don't want to see any AI anywhere near the concierge. I mean, because what that will do, which is exactly counter to what my mother taught me to do, is it'll take away the art of the conversation. And I'll give you an interesting example of this, which happened about 6 months ago. It happened up in Canada. A guy goes online to make a reservation on Air Canada. He's immediately steered to a chatbot, which he didn't want. He wanted to talk to a human being. And every question he asked the chatbot, the answer was so wrong, incorrect, misleading, and dangerous, but he didn't know any different, that he followed it, never made it to the plane, never got to the flight, never went anywhere. And he goes to Air Canada. They won't fix it. So he sues them. And it goes to court. And Air Canada, I think, stupidly decided they're going to fight this in court. So they go before the judge. They present the case. And now it's time for Air Canada's defense. And Air Canada's defense, and they were serious about this, was we can't be responsible for a chatbot. It has a mind of its own. Wait a minute. You programmed the chatbot, you idiots.
Yes.
And guess what? They lost the case, right? Air Canada lost the case. Now, hopefully it sets some precedent. So I'm all in favor of chatbot balancing my checkbook.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in favor of chatbot writing the checks.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, in a way, AI is like removing our ability for critical thinking? Because not to defend Air Canada in this situation, but you did have the user just blindly following what this chatbot was saying rather than being like, that doesn't sound right. Let me fact check that.
He wasn't blindly following it. He did what he was told to do because he didn't have any option. You're giving him the idea that he's a sophisticated traveler. Let me tell you something about travelers. Last year, 84% of everyone who flew on American Airlines only flew the airline once.
Right. Because after that first flight with American, it was so bad they never came back.
Well, you said that, I didn't. But the thing is, you're taking advantage of them by forcing them to go to a chatbot when they don't know any different.
Yeah, yeah. It's very true. I just had a similar experience yesterday. The Spotify Wrapped came out and I kept getting emails from Spotify being like, you won this award, open this. And I kept trying to open it and it wasn't working. Every time I would be put to like contact us, it was like, whoops, this isn't working. It just was, nothing was working. And finally, I found a way to get to the chatbot. And at the same time, I tried opening this in a different browser profile and I was able to open it. At the same time that the chatbot told me, you're not eligible for Spotify Wrapped this year. And I said, well, that's not true. I've just opened it and you've emailed me 5 times about what I've won within it. And they're like, let me transfer you to a person. The person then told me the same thing and then was like, have a good day. And I'm like, what?
Well, look, I'll give you another example. Recently, ChatGPT partnered with Expedia to do some of their trip planning for the people who go online. And a good friend of mine, Gary Leff, who writes a great website called viewfromthewing.com, you know what he did? I thought it was brilliant. He went on ChatGPT and asked him, should he go to Expedia from now on, now that they're partnered with ChatGPT? And you know what it told him?
What?
No. There you go.
That's amazing. I mean, okay, so we're talking about some frustrations here, but overall in the travel industry, what is something that still frustrates you? You've covered the industry for so long now. Is there anything that you're like, why haven't we solved this yet, guys?
Yeah, we could spend the next 3 hours on that because that's what I write about and talk about every single week. We can deal with areas of passenger rights. We can deal with areas of air safety and the way the FAA is run or not run. That does not benefit the public in any way, shape, or form. And it hasn't changed in 45 or 60 years. The FAA was established by an act of Congress in 1935. That's 90 years ago, with 2 mandates that work at odds of each other. Mandate number 1, which we can all support, is to enact and enforce safety. We all love that. But mandate number 2 is to promote the business of aviation. You can't do both. And as a result, the FAA has lost their way. since day one in thinking that the airlines and the manufacturers are their clients. They're not. We're the clients. And I can go back 90 years to tell you all the things the FAA screwed up because they defer to the manufacturer or the operator and not to air safety and not to solving problems because they were worried about the economic cost to the manufacturer or the operator when there was a clear solution for the safety. And this is from the day one to the 737 MAX to the recent crash in Louisville at the MD-11. I can spend hours on it. don't get me started, right? That's the first one. By the way, having said that, in fairness, we just celebrated the 30 safest years in commercial aviation since aviation began. So why am I saying this? Because we're not going to be able to improve that average. The question is, can we maintain it? And the answer is, based on everything I know, no. When it comes to passenger rights, the U.S. Department of Transportation is completely feeble and toothless, whether it comes to airline operations, airport operations, truth in advertising, transparency, or basic passenger rights. And the closest we came to it was the last administration. In the waning days of the Biden administration, the DOT did propose for the first time a delineated airline passenger bill of rights, which spelled out the responsibilities that we have, the responsibilities that the airlines have, and when things mess up and what needs to be done. Under federal law, once you make a proposed rule, announcement, you have 90 days of comment and public comment to review it. Well, that 90 days extended into the first 30 days of the Trump administration, and the very first thing the Trump administration did was announce they were killing it because they were lobbied so strongly by the airlines. So we're right back to the 1940s again.
Right. What would you like to see in that passenger bill of rights?
Another 3-hour conversation. But it would be severe financial penalties for bad behavior under the airline's control. So you rule out weather, you rule out acts of God, right? But if your flight is delayed or canceled because they couldn't find a crew, or because they had a mechanical, or because they couldn't get to a gate, that's their responsibility. You need compensation, right? If the airline, charges you for a fee and then doesn't deliver the service on that fee, you need to get it refunded. Do you know that the US DOT many, many years ago already has a rule that if the airline charges you to check a bag and then the airline doesn't deliver the bag, you need to get that fee back. Tell me the last time anybody got their fee back. They didn't get it because the airlines have not been forced to do it. I'll give you another example on the other side of that, which proves the point that I'm making. About 12 years ago, there used to be so many delays on the tarmac where planes would push back from the gate and then sit for 3 and 4 and 5 hours, passengers having no food, no water. I mean, people were getting sick, that the DOT made a rule, which stuck, called the tarmac delay rule. And the tarmac delay rule says this: anytime you push back from the gate and you don't either take off or go back to the gate within 3 hours, you're liable to a fine of up to $27,500 per passenger, not per incident. On a loaded 737, you're already into 7 figures.
Wow.
The airlines complain, this is unfair, we can't make it work. How many 3-hour plus tarmac delays have there been in the last 12 years?
That's exactly what I'm hearing when what you're saying is like, this would actually change behavior because they're not going to want to pay a 7-figure penalty. So they'll figure out how not to sit on the tarmac for 3 hours.
Exactly. So there you go. It proves the point. So if I wasn't doing any job that I'm doing right now, the one job I would love to have with the freedom to say what I'm saying, make me the Secretary of Transportation. We'll solve these problems overnight. Of course, the airlines will have hit squads out for me, but the point is, I don't work for the airlines. In that situation, I'm a government person working for the citizens.
Yeah, well, not to digress, but that should be the purpose of government, right? Is to protect the citizens, but
Right.
It doesn't feel that way.
If you're
Wow.
asking what frustrates me, there you have those two issues.
That's huge. That's huge. And actually shines a light on something that I think a lot of us, especially like you were saying, that stat of so many people when they take a trip, it's 1 trip per year. I think we'd like to bury our head in the sand and think we're protected by the FAA or these other organizations or even these big companies. And yeah, I'm sure they also don't want their planes to crash, potentially because of the monetary implication.
Yes, but here's the key. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to the FAA or airlines. It applies to everything you do. Every business in America right now is dominated by a CFO mentality, more concerned with cost than value. And the same thing applies to the FAA. It's crazy. I mean, I'll give you one that really angers me. For 50 years, and most people didn't know this, if Boeing, or in the old days, Lockheed, or McDonnell Douglas, or even Convair was building a plane, that plane had to be certified as airworthy. Who certified it? You would think the FAA.
Sure.
The FAA never had the budget or the staff to do it, so they delegated the job to what they called FAA designated inspectors. And who did they work for? Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed. That's like, if I'm saying to you, I'm sitting in this chair and I built this chair and I say it's safe, trust me, you don't want to sit in it, right? So we exposed this after the Boeing 737 MAX incidents, those 2 fatal crashes. And Congress woke up and said this is wrong and Boeing should not be allowed to do this anymore. And they said to the FAA, this practice has to stop. But guess what? They never allocated enough money for the FAA to hire their own independent inspectors. So guess what happened last month? They're letting Boeing do it again.
Oh my gosh. We don't learn from our own mistakes.
What am I missing here?
It's shocking, but it's also not, like it's sad because you're like, here we go again. If only we could just learn from the last time.
What's the incentive for an FAA designated inspector on the payroll of Boeing to stop the production line because he sees a problem?
Zero. He'll get fired. Well, and also like, as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, this is the beauty of journalism, right? You're highlighting things, you're exposing things. And then maybe here's the potentially positive side of social media is then those stories could go viral and you can get the masses behind you pushing government to say, this literally makes no sense.
Right. This is not a red state issue. It's not a blue state issue. It's a safety issue.
Yeah.
If your plane is delayed, you're going to piss off Democrats and Republicans. Come on, guys. We're all on this. Let's do something.
Right. So as a journalist, I want to switch gears for a second and just pick your brain on a couple of things before we get into the final questions. But
sure.
I imagine you receive a ton of pitches from companies, people, individuals, what have you. What is a really big pet peeve of yours for a bad pitch?
Oh, it's an easy answer. It's a pitch from somebody who's never read anything I've written, watched anything I've ever done. They got my name off a list and they were told by the client, mass mailing, send it out. With no idea, by the way, if it's a good story or not. They're just doing their client's bidding. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And so, why pay attention to that?
And what's the thing that someone can say or do that will actually get you to read the email or respond to the pitch?
If they've done their own homework on the story itself, to understand my audience and understand why it would be important to that audience, good, bad, or ugly. And you know what? Those publicists, oh, and by the way, they don't email me. They call me. They have a conversation with me. We have an entire generation now that doesn't know how to have a conversation. We have an entire generation that doesn't know how to make a phone call. They are paralyzed when they're looking at their phone, unless they're looking at an app. But they don't know how to use their voice and talk to somebody. And so it's all about relationships. Remember I talked about trusted sources? There are trusted sources that I have with people who are PR people because I know they're not pitching me garbage. Now, I may not be interested in the story, but I can respect the idea of the pitch.
Yeah. And give them feedback on it too. It goes back to what you were saying from your mom of like, if the PR person is showing more interest in you and your audience and why this is a beneficial or interesting story for you versus, hey, this is what I need from you to do.
It's not about interest in me. It's about interest in my audience. And they will know, a good PR person is no different than a good writer. Writing is involved in both. And they will know right away if it's a relatable story.
Absolutely.
Somebody who gets appointed food and beverage manager in Calcutta is not a story I'm going to do tomorrow.
Right. Speaking of Calcutta, maybe, you have visited more than 152 countries. Is there any favorites? And I'm sure there is a whole book of places, do not go. We can check out, but what about the ones that really stand out to you in a positive way?
Well, my favorite place is are the 44 I haven't gone to yet. I don't have a bucket list. I don't believe in bucket lists. I believe the only list you should have are all the places you've never been, period. And then going down that list, I only have about 4 places I wouldn't go. I can't tell you how many people will say to me, where'd you come back from? And I'd say, oh, here. Oh, it's not on my list. Who publishes that list?
I know.
Here's the deal. The only place I won't go is a place where no one's in control. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So would I go to North Korea tomorrow? Yeah, I've been twice because I know it's in control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Iran. Yeah, I know it's in control. Would I go to parts of Chechnya, part of Yemen, part of Syria right now? No, because no one's in control. Part of Mali or Central African Republic or the border between Cambodia and Thailand right now? Probably not. But that won't stop me from going to Thailand, and it won't stop me from going to Cambodia. If there's a riot in Cincinnati, it won't stop me from going to Cleveland. We paint with too broad a brush, which is why State Department advisories, as well-intentioned as they may be, are usually misleading, incorrect, and wrong.
Is there a trip that changed you the most?
I mean, not to sound silly about this, but every trip changes you. And because if you start with any preconceived notions, you're going to get changed instantly the minute you hit the ground. I guess having been to all those countries, I've not met people who are unkind. I've not met people who are angry at me. I've not met people who want to wish me harm. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who wish everybody harm.
Right.
But at the end of the day, travel is the great equalizer. It allows you to, without singing Kumbaya, but build bridges and tear down barriers because you have something in common. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It goes back to the conversation. Look, I've had some tough situations which I needed to talk myself out of, but I didn't just talk myself out of the situation. I became friends with the person.
Yeah.
And we're still friends today. And we talk all the time. But it started out with I was about to get arrested, or I was about to get deported, or I was about to get incarcerated, right? So, because you're in certain situations where that could happen. But I'm not saying I'm being cavalier or I'm some kind of a buccaneer. I'm just saying it doesn't stop me from traveling.
Yeah. Peter, I want to ask you the last 3 questions that I ask every guest. And the first is, what was the best hospitality experience you've ever had?
Wow. Oh, I'll tell you what it was. A couple of years ago, I was going down to Buenos Aires with about 10 journalist friends of mine. And the hotel called me the day before we were leaving and said, listen, we're going to send limos to the airport to get you at 6 a.m. when the plane lands. I said, listen, that's not going to work. Number one, you and I both know the roads won't be ready at 6 a.m. So here's what I want to do. Get rid of the limos, go to everybody on the staff, bellmen, housekeepers, doormen, waiters, anybody who's got a car, and ask them who wants to drive out to the airport. We'll pay for everything and pick us up at 6 a.m. and then have them take us to where they live, in the communities where they hang out, and we're buying breakfast. You know what happened? It did happen. They thought I was crazy. They did it. Not only did we go into their communities and neighborhoods for breakfast, do you know what time the group checked into the hotel? 11:30 that night. We were hanging out. We had such a great time. And 6 months later, the group got together and threw a party in LA and flew them all out. They all came out. That's what hospitality is.
Yes. Yes. I love that. On the flip side, what was the worst hospitality experience you've ever had?
Another 3-hour conversation. No, because the worst hospitality experience is when it's robotic, when it doesn't have meaning, when there's no ROE, meaning return on emotion, and when somebody just does it because they're told to do it. And anybody watching me now or listening to me now will know exactly what I'm saying because they've experienced it.
For sure. For sure.
And by the way, that fish stinks from the head. It's management saying inflexible rules or inflexible behavior. And the heroes happen and the great relationships happen when people violate those rules. And that's when you get best hospitality.
And finally, what does hospitality mean to you? And is there anyone, a person, a brand that you think has truly mastered it?
What hospitality means to me is kindness, welcome, interest, curiosity, and comfort in that order. And I don't care how plush the sheets are or how lovely the mattress is. If the first four things aren't there, I'm never going to get to comfort. And for me, it gets down to the people. I remember my first trip to Bangkok, 1978. I'd never been there before. I was coming in totally new. I get to the airport and everybody is so nice to me. I'm going, well, they must be meeting somebody else named Greenberg because, can't be me. You know what? I was right. It wasn't me. It was who they were and who they are. And from that moment, I realized that's hospitality. And it's easy to get spoiled by it, but I encourage everybody not to get spoiled by it, but pass it forward and show other people how to do it. Because once you do it, everything is possible.
Peter, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Happy to do it.
All right, everyone. It's time for today's sweet summary where I break down the key insights and actionable takeaways from today's conversation. There is no question that Peter Greenberg has lived an extraordinary life and career. But what I appreciate most about him is his authenticity, a buzzword that is thrown around way too much, but feels really accurate for him. Because you know that when you're with him, you're getting his honest, unfiltered take, an unflinching point of view shaped by decades of experience and what feels like a lifelong commitment to learning. It's why he has become such a trusted voice for travelers. As he said, his job as a travel journalist is not to promote, but to present. Peter reminded us how, in this current moment, we face a real problem with fact-checking, or more accurately, the lack thereof. He underscored how much responsibility falls on all of us, creators, storytellers, journalists, and consumers alike, to interrogate information we're given and ensure we're putting our trust in the right people. So many remarkable chapters of his career began with zero formal training. He didn't consider journalism until he walked into his college newspaper's office for the first time. He had never produced a movie before until he found himself with the rights to a story that he knew only he could tell. Even his work in dramatic TV started without traditional training, just genuine interest, conviction, and a willingness to figure it out. And of course, when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Everything has a first. That first TV show, that first movie, and yes, even that very first piece of journalism that Peter still claims was his worst. But we don't get better unless we begin. Unless we put ourselves in the room, take the meeting, travel to the places we haven't visited yet. Because as Peter said, half of luck is just showing up. The beauty of pushing ourselves past that initial threshold is that it reveals who we really are. It builds confidence. It sharpens our instincts, what feels right for us and what definitely does not. It's what allowed him to walk into his publisher's office and bet confidently that a book telling people where not to go would be a New York Times bestseller. Finally, I loved all the lessons he learned from his mom, a determined woman who followed up with the chancellor of his alma mater after he called her out live on GMA. Her focus on the art of the conversation, of being more concerned with being interested than interesting, has clearly shaped who Peter has become. And to me, this is not only true to Peter, but the essence of hospitality itself, of travel itself. To step outside of your comfort zone, to meet people whose lives and perspectives differ wildly from your own, and to exchange ideas with openness and curiosity. Because at the end of the day, all problems look a lot more solvable when we're willing to sit down, break bread, and have a conversation. And that concludes another episode of Sweet Success. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. We all know how important those 5-star reviews are. I also want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in. It means the absolute world to me. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future guests, new topics to cover, or even just want to say hi, don't be shy. Message me through our website, sweetsuccesspodcast.com, or on social media @sweetsuccesspodcast. That's sweet like hotel suite. Once again, I'm your host, Katie Cline, and I'm super excited to see you all next week.